Imagine a powerful artificial intelligence system. How does it actually decide what's okay to say? Or, what actions to encourage? Or maybe when to just refuse a request?
Yeah, what values does it even operate under? For a long time, that answer involved a lot of human oversight, really labor-intensive stuff.
Right. But what if an AI could teach itself? Teach itself to be helpful and harmless, guided by its own, explicit set of ethical principles.
That's the core idea we're diving into today.
Welcome to our deep dive into constitutional AI. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating breakthrough that gives language models explicit values, basically, a constitution to guide their behavior.
And our mission here is to show you how this approach works, and maybe more importantly, why it's set to potentially reshape responsible AI development.
Which has, big implications for anyone building with or even just relying on advanced AI these days.
Definitely. The fundamental challenge, the problem this research tackles, it really lies in the limits of the older methods for aligning AI values.
You mean how historically teaching AI values relied so heavily on just massive amounts of human feedback?
Exactly that. It often meant human contractors comparing different AI responses.
Picking the better one.
Yeah, choosing the better one based on principles like, is it helpful, is it harmless? But think about what that actually involves.
There's some serious downsides there.
There are. What's particularly concerning is this approach could expose people, the human reviewers, to genuinely disturbing content.
Because they have to review the outputs from red teaming, right?
Mm.
The prompt's designed to deliberately trigger bad responses.
Precisely. Humans had to look directly at that harmful material.
And beyond being disturbing, it just didn't scale, did it? Was that bottleneck really holding back innovation in AI alignment?
Oh, absolutely. It required immense time, immense resources. It wasn't easily accessible for many researchers.
So as the AI models got bigger and more capable,
Human reviewers just couldn't keep pace. The question became, how do you align these incredibly capable AIs without, overburdening or even potentially traumatizing the humans involved in the process?
and that's where constitutional AI comes in.
That's exactly where it steps in. It's presented as a groundbreaking solution.
So constitutional AI, or CAI,
Hmm.
the core idea is using AI feedback to evaluate the outputs, right? Guided by this constitution.
Yes, a set of explicit principles written in natural language. Think of it maybe like giving the AI a rule book for good behavior.
But not just any rule book. It's more like a foundational ethical framework the AI can interpret and apply itself.
That's a really key distinction. The core values in this Constitution guide the model towards being helpful, honest, and crucially, harmless.
Which means actively avoiding toxic stuff, discriminatory outputs.
And refusing to help humans with illegal or unethical requests. And a huge benefit here is the transparency.
Right, because the values are explicit.
Exactly. They're clear, they're inspectable. You can actually look at the principles it's operating under. Much easier to understand and adjust than, say, implicit values learned from these massive, kind of opaque human data sets.
Okay, so that self-improvement part is really central. How does the AI actually teach itself? You mentioned a two-phase process.
Yeah, it's quite an ingenious system, really. Phase one is supervised learning. It focuses on critique and revision.
Okay, how does that start?
It starts with an AI model, the one being trained, generating responses to those challenging red teaming prompts we mentioned.
The ones designed to provoke harmful behavior.
Right. And, initially those responses are often pretty problematic.
Makes sense. So that's the starting point for the learning.
Exactly. This is where the internal learning kicks in.
Yeah.
The AI is then prompted to critique its own response.
Based on its constitution.
Yes, based on a randomly selected principle from its constitution. It might be asked something like, identify specific ways the last response was harmful, unethical, racist, sexist, toxic, and so on.
So it calls itself out, essentially.
It does. And then immediately after that critique, it's asked to revise its original response based on that critique and the constitutional principles.
Wow. And does it do that just once?
It can actually repeat that critique revision loop multiple times. The paper mentions testing up to 4 revisions.
So it gets progressively better, refining the response.
Precisely, refining it to remove the harmful content. Then a language model is fine-tuned on all these self-revised, now harmless responses, along with other examples focused on helpfulness. That prepares it for phase 2.
Okay, so phase 1 is teaching it to critique and fix its own mistakes based on the rules. What happens in phase 2 to reinforce that?
Phase 2 is reinforcement learning from AI feedback. You might see it called RLAIF.
RLAF. Okay.
This stage mirrors traditional reinforcement learning methods like RLHF, reinforcement learning from human feedback. But the key difference is, instead of human preferences guiding the harmlessness part.
It uses AI-generated feedback.
Exactly. For harmlessness, it uses AI feedback. So, another AI, they call it a feedback model, evaluates pairs of responses generated by the assistant AI.
That picks a better one.
It picks the one that's better according to a specific constitutional principle it's been given for that comparison. For instance, it might be asked to select, quote, the response that a wise, ethical, polite, and friendly person would more likely say.
Interesting phrasing.
Yeah.
And that creates a data set,
Yes, a data set of AI-generated preferences about harmlessness.
which then guides the final tuning.
Correct. The AI assistant is then further fine-tuned using reinforcement learning, guided by this preference model. And importantly, this model combines the AI's harmlessness judgments with human judgments that are still used for helpfulness. So humans aren't completely out of the loop, but their role shifts.
That makes sense. You mentioned something about chain of thought prompting being important here. How does that fit in?
Ah, yes. That was a really interesting finding in the research. They found that using chain of thought prompting during the AI evaluation stage significantly boosts the AI's ability to identify harms.
So just asking the AI feedback model to, think step by step when it's judging the responses.
Pretty much. Phrases like, let's think step by step. It seems to force the model to articulate its reasoning, break down the problem.
Which makes its decision-making clearer.
Exactly. More transparent. It helps it pinpoint why a response might violate a principle. It's kind of like asking a student to show their work.
Right. It improves accuracy, and you can see how they got there.
Precisely.
Okay, this is fascinating. So with the older methods, it often felt like a trade-off, didn't it? You push for more helpfulness, maybe you get slightly less harmlessness, or vice versa. Does constitutional AI actually break that? Can you really get both?
Well, that's perhaps the most exciting part, the real win-win here. The research indicates, yes, it achieves what's called a Pareto improvement, meaning it produces AI models that are simultaneously more helpful, A&D, more harmless, compared to models trained only with traditional human feedback for harmlessness.
More helpful and more harmless. That sounds, well, almost too good to be true. What stands out most to you as a benefit? For me, it's the way it tackles evasiveness.
Ah, yes, that's a big one.
Earlier models trained for harmlessness often just clammed up, right? They'd give canned answers like, I can't answer that if you ask something tricky.
Very unhelpful, often frustrating for users.
But CAI models, they seem designed to engage more thoughtfully. They explain why they object.
Exactly. They provide a nuanced, helpful refusal instead of just a blunt shutdown. So the example they give is, instead of just refusing to talk about stealing,
It might say something like,
hacking into your neighbor's Wi-Fi is an invasion of their privacy, and I strongly advise against it. It may also land you in legal trouble. It explains the reasoning based on principles.
that level of thoughtfulness is a huge improvement for user interaction.
Absolutely. And connecting this back to the development side, the scalability is just transformative. Because AI is supervising AI for the harmlessness part.
You need way fewer human labels.
Drastically fewer. They talk about going from potentially tens of thousands of human comparisons down to maybe around 10 or so core principles in the Constitution.
Wow. That makes AI alignment much more efficient, much more scalable, frees up human resources.
Big time. And that brings us back to the transparency point you made earlier.
Because the principles are written out.
Right. The explicit natural language principles in the Constitution make the AI's ethical framework clear. It's inspectable, offers much greater insight into its decision-making than just looking at, a massive data set of human preferences.
It feels like a step towards actually understanding why the AI behaves the way it does, demystifying it a bit.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay.
Thinking about the details, like the principles themselves and the revision process.
Yeah, they mentioned using around 16 principles in their experiments. Does the exact number matter much?
Interestingly, the research suggested that while the sheer number of principles didn't drastically change the overall harmlessness score,
More principles didn't automatically mean much safer?
not dramatically, no. But what it did do was add diversity to the AI's responses during training. And that diversity seems pretty crucial for robust training.
Can you expand on that? Why is diversity in the principles helpful?
Well, if you train only on a very narrow set of principles, the AI might learn to satisfy those specific rules, but maybe miss the broader picture, or its responses could become rigid.
Or maybe easily tricked by something slightly outside those narrow rules.
Potentially, yes. By sampling from a diverse set, maybe principles about safety, fairness, honesty, non-maleficence, the AI develops a more, let's say, nuanced understanding of what constitutes good behavior.
Like building a more flexible, ethical muscle memory.
That's a good way to put it. And that iterative critique revision process we talked about, that consistently improved the harmlessness scores in their tests. Each loop made a difference.
And even if the AI's self-critiques aren't always perfect,
They still offer a valuable window into the model's reasoning, right? Making the whole thing more transparent, especially maybe for smaller models where understanding the internals is even harder.
okay, but it can't be perfect. What about challenges? You hear about things like Goodharting.
Ah, yes, Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
Right. So in this context, could the AI become, like, overly harsh just to meet the harmlessness target?
Yeah.
Or maybe start inserting generic positive phrases everywhere?
That's a definite risk. They observed the AI sometimes generating responses like, you are valid, valued, and cared for, almost as a boilerplate way to seem harmless, even when it wasn't really appropriate.
So how do researchers deal with that?
It's an ongoing challenge. They found that carefully refining the wording of the principles in the Constitution and managing how the preference labels are generated helps mitigate this kind of over-optimization. It's about making sure the Constitution captures the intent, not just enabling surface-level mimicry.
Makes sense. So stepping back, what are the broader societal implications here? There's this idea of dual use, right?
Yes, that's a critical consideration. While CAI makes it easier, potentially, to train beneficial AI systems.
It also lowers the barrier for training potentially harmful systems.
Yeah.
Because you need less direct human oversight for the alignment part.
That's the concern. And shifting the burden of safety testing away from direct human review of harmful outputs could, if we're not careful, hide unforeseen failure modes. We need robust testing beyond just what the AI itself checks.
But on the plus side,
On the flip side, it does liberate human red teamers, the people trying to find flaws from that really ethically uncomfortable task of constantly trying to bait AI into saying awful things.
right, they don't have to wade through as much disturbing content themselves.
Exactly. They can focus maybe on more sophisticated testing, finding deeper vulnerabilities without that direct exposure. It's a significant shift in the safety workflow.
So when you boil it down, what's truly striking is how this constitutional AI approach empowers the AI system to sort of develop and refine its own ethical compass,
Guided by those explicit principles.
resulting in models that aren't just tweaked to be helpful or harmless, but seem to be consistently both. It feels like a really significant step towards self-supervised AI alignment.
Building on explicit values, which are inspectable, rather than just implicit human judgments hidden in data.
So thinking about the future, what does this all mean? If AI can learn complex ethical behaviors from just a handful of principles, well, what else could we teach it?
What other aspects of humanity, perhaps?
Yeah. How might this shape the way we interact with AI down the line? And what new responsibilities does it put on us, the humans, to make sure those foundational principles, that Constitution, genuinely reflects our collective best interest?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? What principles should be in that Constitution? If you were writing one, what would you prioritize?
That's something for all of us to think about.
Indeed. The journey to align AI with human values is really just beginning, but constitutional AI definitely offers a compelling vision, a potential pathway for how we might actually get there.